Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker. Today we have episode 427 for May 5th, 2025. So, for starters, happy Cinco de Mayo. I think I'll have to have myself a big margarita tonight just to celebrate. Any excuse for a big margarita. And also, thanks to all the new patrons. I hope you are enjoying your Dragon Challenge coins. I think most of them should have arrived by now. And if you missed this promotion, never fear. I will try to do one sooner than next year. I'll see if I can't target something probably for this fall. Of course, there's still plenty of benefits to being a patron, including if you join at the right level, you get a little prize from the treasure chest, which is basically a promo code for Proton or Malwarebytes or Safing or whatever I happen to have on hand. And by the way, a quick thank you to all three of those companies for providing those promo codes. It's very nice, and it's a great perk that I like to be able to give to my patrons. All right, we've got a news show for you this week. Several topics to cover. We're going to start off with an FTC, or Federal Trade Commission, warning about a new scam going around. The dating app Raw, which I've never heard of, but pretty creepy, and also just had a data exposure that I want to make you aware of. And of course, we'll broaden that out to some takeaways in general about these sorts of apps. AI is invading everything, and it's getting really hard to turn off. There's a really interesting article from CNET about the author trying to find all the ways that AI had invaded their Pixel phone and tried to disable them. Juice jacking is back in the news. This is the hack that can potentially take over your smartphone by plugging it into a foreign malicious USB port. And these researchers have found a clever way to bypass the protections against this that have been put in by Apple and Google. Another set of security researchers have found some bugs in Apple's AirPlay that you should know about. Microsoft is moving toward passwordless accounts by default, which has some pros and cons. Google Wallet is expanding to many different countries, and they are trying to embed some features that allow you to, let's say, prove your age without necessarily giving away your birthday, and just generally use your phone as your digital ID. And then finally, I've got to address the latest twist in the Signalgate scandal, because it turns out they weren't actually using Signal. They were using a knockoff of Signal, which has all sorts of other implications. I found a great article from Consumer Reports that I wanted to talk about that goes into great detail about contactless payments, in other words, mobile payment apps. I did my best to summarize it, but it was still way too long. So I will talk a little bit about that, but what I'm actually doing in the background is actually reaching out to the author to see if I can get her to come on the program and do an interview and dedicate a whole show to this, because it's really, really interesting stuff. And then finally, my tip of the week, I'll tell you how to disable your evil MAID. And that is your mobile ad ID, which is something we learned about last week with Zach Edwards. So, lots to talk about. Let's get to it. All right, first up, this is from Lifehacker. Scams often fit with the old adage, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. The Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC, and the FBI, or the Federal Bureau of Investigations, are warning consumers about several similar-sounding scams that involve the promise of discounted services, ranging from utilities to health insurance, that end with fraudsters stealing your money and you having nothing to show for it. One iteration of this scam begins with the robocall from someone who claims to be from a utility company, like AT&T or Comcast Xfinity, that offers phone, TV, or internet services. As the FTC alert describes, the scammer promises a 40 to 50% discount on future bills, bundles, or product purchases, but only if you act fast and pay up front. They'll ask you to purchase a gift card and provide them with the number, and they may also request your utility account information. A public service announcement from the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center describes a similar scam involving discount medical insurance. In this scheme, fraudsters reach out via unsolicited calls, texts, or emails and pretend to represent legitimate health insurance providers. They may pressure targets to sign up for a new plan at a discounted rate that's available only for a limited time or promise free services. Once victims purchase a plan, they are unable to cancel it, receive refunds, or use the supposed benefits upon receiving costly medical or dental bills that they believed were covered. As with many scams, there are a few telltale signs that the promise of discounted services is fake, including a stranger contacting you out of the blue trying to sell you something, the sense of urgency to act now or lose the opportunity, and the demand to pay right away, especially with a gift card. To avoid becoming a victim, don't make any quick decisions. End the conversation and contact the company that's supposedly offering the deal to confirm whether it's real. Only use phone numbers and websites you search for directly. Do not click links or call back numbers you're sent in messages, and never pay for anything up front. If you are targeted for discounted medical insurance, research the company through your state insurance commissioner and the Better Business Bureau to check whether it's reputable and licensed in your state. Confirm that your providers accept the plan and read any policy documents carefully before signing. If you don't receive any documents, it's almost certainly a fraud. So yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that, but I mean, more than likely, if you're getting this kind of thing, it's just a scam. Just hang up and forget about it. Obviously, anytime anybody asks you to pay for something with gift cards should always be a huge red flag. And like this article says, beware of anything that's like super urgent, like you have to act right now or you'll lose it, or there'll be some sort of penalties if you don't. These are common in these sorts of scams. And by the way, this is really good information to spread on to other people as well. I don't know how you work this into casual conversation, but if you've got elderly parents that might fall victim to these sorts of things, for example, you might want to bend their ear and say, hey, just FYI, these sorts of things are going on right now. If this comes up, just hang up. And if they're unsure, have them reach out to you and see if you can help them sort out whether it's real or not. All right, next up, this is from TechCrunch, and this is about an app I've never heard of, but even if you're not using this particular app, again, this is just kind of good information to to soak in and realize that it could happen with other dating apps or other such companies. A security lapse at dating app Raw, that's just RAW, publicly exposed the personal data and private location data of its users, TechCrunch has found. The exposed data include users' display names, dates of birth, dating and sexual preferences associated with the Raw app, as well as users' locations. Some of the location data included coordinates that were specific enough to locate Raw app users with street-level accuracy. Raw, which launched in 2023, is a dating app that claims to offer more genuine interactions with others, in part by asking users to upload daily selfie photos. The company does not disclose how many users it has, but its app listing on the Google Play Store notes more than 500,000 Android downloads to date. News of the security lapse comes in the same week that the startup announced a hardware extension of its dating app, the Raw Ring, an unreleased wearable device that it claims will allow app users to track their partner's heart rate and other sensor data to receive AI-generated insights, ostensibly to detect infidelity. Notwithstanding the moral and ethical issues of tracking romantic partners and the risks of emotional surveillance, Raw claims on its website and in its privacy policy that its app and its unreleased device both use end-to-end encryption, a security feature that prevents anyone other than the user, including the company, from accessing the data. When we tried the app this week, which included an analysis of the app's network traffic, TechCrunch found no evidence that the app uses end-to-end encryption. Instead, we found that the app was publicly spilling data about its users to anyone with a web browser. Raw fixed the data exposure on Wednesday, shortly after TechCrunch contacted the company with details of the bug. And this is a quote from Marina Anderson, the co-founder of Raw, who told TechCrunch, quote, "All previously exposed endpoints have been secured, and we've implemented additional safeguards to prevent similar issues in the future," unquote. When asked by TechCrunch, Anderson confirmed that the company had not performed a third-party security audit of its app, adding that its, quote, "focus remains on building a high-quality product and engaging meaningfully with our growing community," unquote. Anderson would not commit to proactively notifying affected users that their information was exposed, but said the company would, quote, "submit a detailed report to the relevant data protection authorities under applicable regulations," unquote. Which, of course, might mean doing nothing, depending on how they interpret those regulations. It's not immediately known how long the app was publicly spilling its users' data. Anderson said that the company was still investigating the incident. Regarding its claim that the app uses end-to-end encryption, Anderson said Raw, quote, "uses encryption in transit and enforces access controls for sensitive data within our infrastructure. Further steps will be clear after thoroughly analyzing the situation," unquote. Anderson would not say when asked whether the company plans to adjust its privacy policy, and Anderson did not respond to a follow-up email from TechCrunch. TechCrunch discovered the bug on Wednesday during a brief test of the app. As part of our test, we installed the raw dating app on a virtualized Android device, which allows us to use the app without having to provide any real-world data, such as our physical location. TechCrunch discovered the data exposure within a few minutes of using the raw app. When we first loaded the app, we found that it was pulling the user's profile information directly from the company's servers, and that the server was not protecting the return data with any authentication. In practice, that meant that anyone could access any other user's private information by using a web browser to visit the web address of the exposed server. And they give the URL here, which is kind of important. It says api.raw.app/users/ followed by a unique 11-digit number corresponding to another app user. Changing the digits to correspond with any other user's 11-digit identifier returned private information from that user's profile, including their location data. Okay, so it actually goes on here, but this is the important part. So, first of all, they're claiming end-to-end encryption, which they were actually not using in this case. This API is what's called a REST API, and it's very common in apps today. And it's a way for apps to, talk to servers in a computer language. But it's actually very, very easy for anybody who's not terribly initiated in using computers or doing security stuff to use this same API, like these guys did, to find other people's information. And so the way this should work is that it should be authenticated so that you can only return information about you when you're using this API to talk to their servers. What they found was there was no authentication. And since you could look at this URL that ends in basically an identifier, all they had to do was just change that identifier and they got someone else's information. And what bad guys usually do in this case when they find something like this is they write a computer program to go and try every single possible 11-digit identifier to get everybody's information. That is the danger of these sorts of APIs when you don't have some sort of authentication on them. So what's the takeaway from all this? The takeaway is that you can't trust companies when they say that they have got military-grade end-to-end encryption. When they promise all these technological privacy and security solutions, it's really hard to know who to trust. And as this article kind of alludes to, having a third-party audit can definitely help in that regard. Now, of course, that third party has to be reputable. And how do you know if it's reputable? Yeah, see, it gets difficult. So in practical terms, you really just kind of have to wait and see if these companies establish a solid reputation, or if it comes from a company that already has a solid security reputation and a privacy reputation. And just know that when you're using apps like this, like dating apps in particular, where you could potentially be giving it some really super personal information like sexual preferences, or very personal details about yourself, including your location, by the way, which is very personal and can be used to stalk you, among other things. It's honestly just a mess. And regulations would help, but also we just really need to be very careful about who we trust with this sorts of information. All right, next up, this one's from CNET, and it's about an author who was trying to figure out all the ways in which AI had invaded his Google Pixel phone and tried to disable them. It's a very, very long article. If this is something that interests you, I highly recommend that you read it, but I'm going to kind of just give you the overview here and tell you the kinds of things that are in it. But again, the article's way too long to even summarize here. And you wouldn't remember all the finer points of where to go in the settings to find these things anyway. So if you're really curious, you're going to want to look in the show notes and read the full article. But let me give you just an idea of what this guy found and give you my take on the current state of AI on mobile devices. Okay, so the author says, I've owned at least one phone from 7 of the 9 generations of Google's Pixel devices, not to mention quite a few Nexus phones from back in the day. The Pixel software is clean, smart, and far from the heavily skinned experience Samsung brings to the table, which is just my preference. The 8th and 9th generations, and especially the Pixel 9 family, have leaned hard into AI, to the point that it's tempting to think of them as Gemini phones, period. And Gemini is Google's AI system. The AI is woven in something fierce. I know that because I've just spent 4 days going through my Pixel 9 Pro XL, trying to see if I could shut all of it off. It's partly for science and partly just to see if I could. Also, a CNET survey last year revealed that many people don't want AI features on their phones, so maybe I could be of service. If you do want to remove AI features from your Pixel, know this. It doesn't always come easy, and sometimes it doesn't come at all. And to be fair, some of that AI is truly useful. So let's get to it. Here's how to remove or at least reduce AI on your Pixel phone. Okay. Now, this is where the author goes through in painstaking detail with images all the places that he could find evidence of AI features woven into standard Google apps and features like Google Photos, Google Messages, Search Labs in the Google app, Gmail, Gemini, Circle to Search, which is a kind of a cool feature where you circle something in an image and it figures out what that thing is and searches for it. The phone app, Google Keep, and Pixel screenshots. So he went through all of those things and did his best to try to remove or disable AI from all of those features on the Pixel phone, which is, basically everywhere. So he goes through all that and then sums it up with this. Some services and subscriptions may have specific AI features that can only be removed if you withdraw from or cancel them, and even then, it's still a toss-up. That's the case, for instance, with Google's Workspace Labs, which houses AI experiments across multiple Google services. Also, if you do opt out, you won't be able to rejoin again. I learned this the hard way. If you bought a Pixel 9 device, your phone comes with a free year of Google One AI Premium, and several AI features become available for you while your subscription is active. I'm currently unable to confirm what features are potentially removed when the subscription ends, or whether they remain as a reminder that you can get the feature back by resubscribing. There are testing programs like Workspace Labs Google has that enable additional features and functionality in its services, most of which require you to manually sign up and agree to take part in them. Identifying exactly what can and can't be removed with testing programs, subscriptions, or potential A/B tests is murky at best. If you've opted into the beta program for specific Google apps in the Play Store, you might want to entertain going back to the official version. Hardly a guarantee, but it could potentially remove some AI features in beta versions of the app. Okay, so a few things I want to say about this, and this is bigger than just Google. It's really, it's everything, because AI is just taking over. They're putting it in everything. This is often done without asking you, and sometimes even without telling you. And as this article shows, it can be damn hard to remove or disable these AI features. They are really woven into apps that we've been using for years and just taken for granted, and now they're being shoved in there without any obvious way, in some cases, to disable or remove them. So the key thing to remember here is that all of these AI features often require sending your private data to the cloud for processing. Now, Apple is doing its best to do its AI processing on the device whenever possible, which is good, but there are still cases even on Apple phones where some of this processing needs to go up to the cloud. Again, Apple is going to great lengths to try to make that cloud processing private and anonymous. But this is, in practice, very difficult to do, and it remains to be seen how well it's going to work. And honestly, other than Apple, my impression is that most companies aren't even bothering to try to make this processing anonymous. And in fact, a lot of them, they're ad companies. So Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, Google, those are companies that all make significant or even the bulk of their revenue from advertising. And so it's really in their best interest to collect as much information about you as possible. So there's a built-in conflict of interest there. AI technology is simultaneously exciting and terrifying on multiple levels. As a technology person, in the utopian world, I think AI has a lot of promise. I use things like ChatGPT all the time because it's great for brainstorming and summarizing and researching. And I just make sure that my interactions with ChatGPT don't include any really personal information. But there's a lot of problems with AI, and it's not just privacy. I mean, it takes an ungodly amount of energy to train some of these models. It wastes a lot of water, not in the sense that the water is actually consumed, like we can't get it back. It's turned into water vapor, but it's no longer available in the system anymore, and we have to wait for it to go up to the clouds and rain down and get caught and blah, blah, blah. But there's obviously a lot of copyright issues with AI. People are very worried that it's being trained on copyrighted materials that is effectively robbing those copyright owners of their artistic creation without credit in a lot of cases. people are using it on everywhere to try to make money and generating tons of really crappy content. I mean, I could go on. There's a lot of trouble with AI. But at the same time, it is undeniably a valuable and helpful tool in situations as well. So it's not going anywhere. It's not like it's going to get banned. So as with any hugely disruptive technology, like the internet was back in the day, we're going to have to get a handle on these problems and come up with some mitigations and figure out a way forward that maximizes the benefits and minimizes the harms. All right, this next one's from Ars Technica, from Dan Gooden, who does some good writing there. And it's an update to the old juice jacking USB vulnerability for smartphones in particular. And I thought it'd be a good time to talk about this subject again, because while it's not super likely to happen, it could be pretty catastrophic if it does, and it's pretty easy to work around. And there's a new twist to this, and they call it choice jacking. So here we go. About a decade ago, Apple and Google started updating iOS and Android, respectively, to make them less susceptible to juice jacking, a form of attack that could surreptitiously steal data or execute malicious code when users plug their phones into special-purpose charging hardware. Now, researchers are revealing that for years, the mitigations have suffered from a fundamental defect that has made them trivial to bypass. Juice jacking was coined in a 2011 article on Krebs on Security, detailing an attack demonstrated at a DEF CON security conference at the time. Juice jacking works by equipping a charger with hidden hardware that can access files and other internal resources of phones in much the same way that a computer can when a user connects it to the phone. An attacker would then make the chargers available in airports, shopping malls, and other public venues for use by people looking to recharge depleted batteries. While the charger was ostensibly only providing electricity to the phone, it was also secretly downloading files or running malicious code on the device behind the scenes. Starting in 2012, both Apple and Google tried to mitigate the threat by requiring users to click a confirmation button on their phones before a computer, or a computer masquerading as a charger, could access files or execute code on the phone. And on Apple anyway, this manifests as a pop-up that says, "Do you trust this device or do you trust this computer?" So you've probably seen that. The logic behind the mitigation was rooted in a key portion of the USB protocol that, in the parlance of the specification, dictates that a USB port can facilitate a host device or a peripheral device at any given time, but not both. In the context of phones, this meant that they could either 1. Host the device on the other end of the USB cord, for instance, if a user connects a thumb drive or a keyboard. In this scenario, the phone is the host that has access to the internals of the drive, keyboard, or other peripheral device. Or 2, it can act as a peripheral device that's hosted by a computer or a malicious charger, which under the USB paradigm is a host that has the system access to the phone. Researchers at Graz University in Austria recently made a discovery that completely undermines the premise behind the countermeasure. They're rooted under the assumption that USB hosts can't inject input that autonomously approves the confirmation prompt. Given that the restriction against a USB device simultaneously acting as a host and a peripheral, the premise seemed sound. The trust models built into both iOS and Android, however, present loopholes that can be exploited to defeat the protections. The researchers went on to devise choice jacking, the first known attack to defeat juice jacking mitigations. And this is a quote from the report. It says, quote, "We present a platform-agnostic attack principle and 3 concrete attack techniques for Android and iOS that allow a malicious charger to autonomously spoof user input to enable its own data connection. Our evaluation using a custom, cheap, malicious charger design reveals an alarming state of USB security on mobile platforms. Despite vendor customizations and USB stacks, choice jacking attacks gain access to sensitive user files on all tested devices from 8 vendors, including the top 6 by market share." In response to the findings, Apple updated the confirmation dialogues in last month's release of iPadOS 18.4 to require a user authentication in the form of a PIN or password. While the researchers were investigating their choice jacking attacks last year, Google independently updated its confirmation with the release of version 15 in November. The researchers say the new mitigation works as expected on fully updated Apple and Android devices. Given the fragmentation of the Android ecosystem, however, many Android devices remain vulnerable. In an email, the researchers said that the fixes provided by Apple and Google successfully blunt choice jacking attacks on iPhones, iPads, and Pixel devices. Many Android devices made by other manufacturers, however, remain vulnerable because they have yet to update their devices to Android 15. Other Android devices, most notably those from Samsung running the One UI7 software interface, don't implement the new authentication requirement even when running on Android 15. The omission leaves these models vulnerable to choice jacking. The biggest threat posed by choice jacking is to Android devices that have been configured to enable USB debugging. Developers often turn on this option so they can troubleshoot problems with their apps, but many non-developers enable it so they can install apps from their computer, root their devices so they can install a different OS, transfer data between devices, and recover bricked phones. Turning it on requires a user to flip a switch in Settings System Developer Options. Word that juice jacking style attacks are once again possible on some Android devices and out-of-date iPhones is likely to breathe new life into the constant warnings from federal authorities, tech pundits, news outlets, and local and state government agencies that phone users should steer clear of public charging stations. Special purpose cords that disconnect data access remain a viable mitigation, but the researchers noted that, quote, data blockers also interfere with modern power negotiation schemes, thereby degrading charge speed, unquote. As I reported in 2023, these warnings are mostly scaremongering, and the advent of choice jacking does little to change that, given that there are no documented cases of such attacks in the wild. That said, people using Android devices that don't support Google's new authentication requirement may want to refrain from public charging. So even though he says that this is not likely to happen and most of these stories are just quote-unquote scaremongering, he's writing an article about this, and I am also reading his article about this, and I feel the same way. These things are really not that likely to happen. I can't imagine too many places where this is really a problem. There haven't really been documented cases of this that I'm aware of, and yet it is absolutely technically possible to do these things, and the fix is just simple. So it's one of those things where why not take the precautions, because there's just no reason to risk it. So I had an article about this that you can look up on my website called, if you just search on juice jacking on firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com, you'll find it. But the short version is this. First of all, if you could do it, just avoid plugging your phone with a cord into any foreign USB port, or for that matter, really any foreign USB device. This is one that you did not buy yourself from packaging that you yourself opened. Again, is it likely that this is going to happen to you? Probably not. But better safe than sorry. But if you travel a lot and need to charge your phone on the go, the simplest option is just to get yourself one of these cables he's talking about. It's called a data blocker cable. Or they also make just short little connectors that are nothing more than about the size of a thumb drive, where you plug your actual data and power cable in one side, and then out the other side, the only thing available on the other side of that USB connector is power, no data. In fact, if it's one of those older style USB-A plugs, you can actually look inside there, and where there would normally be 4 wires inside that little connector, you will only see 2. So that's one option. Better yet, just take along a portable AC charger. Make sure you've always got one with you, so you could just plug into a wall AC outlet and there's no danger there. Or get yourself a portable battery charger. Those are also really handy. I kind of like the middle of the road ones. You don't need to get anything too big. Usually this is just something to quickly charge you up if you're somehow got really low on battery on your phone. It's just kind of a safety measure, so you don't necessarily have to get a really big one for this. But the best possible solution in my view, if you're going to do this, is one that is both an AC charger and a battery. Anker makes several of these, and there's many other brands as well, but they're really nice. They're about the size of a pack of cards. Most of them have a little flip-up prong on them so you could plug them directly into the wall, so they can be used as a wall charger, or they can also just be charged that way, and it's got a built-in plug, which is really nice. All right, next up, this is from Wired, and it's about a vulnerability found in Apple's AirPlay. Apple's AirPlay feature enables iPhones and MacBooks to seamlessly play music or show photos and videos on other Apple devices or third-party speakers and TVs that integrate the protocol. Now, newly uncovered security flaws in AirPlay mean that those same wireless connections could allow hackers to move within a network just as easily, spreading malicious code from one infected device to another. Apple products are known for regularly receiving fixes, but given how rarely some smart home devices are patched, it's likely that these wirelessly enabled footholds for malware across many of the hundreds of models of AirPlay-enabled devices will persist for years to come. On Tuesday, researchers from the cybersecurity firm Oligo, or maybe it's Oligo, I think I'll go with Oligo, revealed what they're calling Airborne, a collection of vulnerabilities affecting AirPlay, Apple's proprietary radio-based protocol for local wireless communication. Bugs in Apple's AirPlay software development kit, or SDK, for third-party devices would allow hackers to hijack gadgets like speakers, receivers, set-top boxes, and smart TVs if they're on the same Wi-Fi network as the hacker's machine. Another set of airborne vulnerabilities would allow hackers to exploit AirPlay-enabled Apple devices too, Apple told Illegal. Though these bugs have been patched in updates over the last several months, and Apple tells Wired that those bugs could have only been exploited when users changed default AirPlay settings. Despite Illegal working with Apple for months to patch the airborne bugs in all affected devices, the Tel Aviv-based security firm warns that the airborne vulnerabilities and many third-party gadgets are likely to remain hackable unless users act to update them. If a hacker can get onto the same Wi-Fi network as those vulnerable devices, whether by hacking into another computer on a home or corporate network, or by simply connecting to the same coffee shop or airport Wi-Fi, they can surreptitiously take over those gadgets. Let me stop real quick. You're probably not likely to be using any of your personal AirPlay devices on like a coffee shop network. But if you did, then yeah, in this case, it could be vulnerable from this. From there, they could use this control to maintain a stealthy point of access, hack other targets on the network, or add machines to a botnet of infected coordinated machines under the hacker's control. Illegal also notes that many of the vulnerable devices have microphones and could be turned into listening devices for espionage. Illegal says it warned Apple about its airborne findings in the late fall and winter of last year, and Apple responded in the months since then by pushing out security updates. The researchers collaborated with Apple to test and validate the fixes for Macs and other Apple products. Apple tells Wired that it has also created patches that are available for impacted third-party devices. The company emphasizes, though, that there are limitations to the attacks that would be possible on AirPlay-enabled devices as a result of the bugs, because an attacker must be on the same Wi-Fi network as the target to exploit them. Apple adds that while there is potentially some user data on devices like TVs and speakers, it is typically very limited. The airborne vulnerabilities Illegal found also affect CarPlay, the radio protocol used to connect to vehicles' dashboard interfaces. Illegal warns that this means hackers could hijack a car's automotive computer, known as its head unit, in any of the more than 800 CarPlay-enabled car and truck models. In those car-specific cases, though, the airborne vulnerabilities could only be exploited if the hacker is able to pair their own device with the head unit via Bluetooth or a USB connection, which drastically restricts the threat of CarPlay-based vehicle hacking. The AirPlay SDK flaws in home media devices, by contrast, may present a more practical vulnerability for hackers seeking to hide on a network, whether to install ransomware or carry out stealthy espionage, all the while hiding on devices that are often forgotten by both consumers and corporate or government network defenders. All right, so this is interesting on a few levels, as usual. So first of all, AirPlay is a cool feature. I am an Apple person. I use it all the time at home. Now, I use it with only Apple devices, so all my Apple stuff gets updated automatically, and so I am not personally worried about the stuff at home. I've updated my phone, I've updated my iPad, my computers, and my HomePods and things like that update themselves. I also use CarPlay, but it sounds like from this article that it would be kind of difficult for a hacker to take advantage of that without being able to somehow connect to my vehicle. And my car, like almost all cars today, is also on the internet. It is also getting software updates. And so I would assume that at some point it would get the CarPlay update that would fix this as well. So the real vulnerability that I want to draw your attention to from this one is the same one that the article calls out. And that is if you have any third party, in other words, non-Apple devices that have nevertheless implemented the Apple AirPlay standard, those devices also need to get updated because they will also be vulnerable. And a lot of those devices may be tricky to update. Some of those devices may be impossible to update. But again, according to this article, what would have to happen is that somebody would have to get on your Wi-Fi network somehow, find these devices, and then be able to hack these devices. So, how likely is that? Not very. But this is the kind of thing that, corporate spies and, government intelligence agencies would be all over if they could find, somebody's third-party AirPlay-enabled device in the ambassador's room at an embassy, for example, or in the Oval Office at the White House kind of thing. This is where those kind of things would be highly targeted. So maybe the key takeaway here is this. When I say there's an update to Apple stuff, everybody should update their devices. These are the kind of bugs that are getting fixed that definitely need to be fixed. And this is why you always want to make sure that you're keeping your software up to date, especially on some of these IoT type devices. All right, next up, a short article from Bleeping Computer. And it's about Microsoft trying to make all of their new accounts passwordless by default. In other words, not requiring a password. Microsoft has announced that all new Microsoft accounts will be, quote unquote, passwordless by default to secure them against password attacks such as phishing, brute force, and credential stuffing. And I'll come back and explain those after the article. The announcement comes after the company started rolling out updated sign-in and sign-up user experience, or UX flows, for web and mobile apps in March, optimized for passwordless and passkey-first authentication. Redmond, in other words, the city of Redmond, where Microsoft is from, Redmond says the best passwordless method will be enabled for each account and set as the default. The company also wants more customers to switch to passkeys, a more secure alternative to passwords that uses biometric authentication, such as fingerprints and facial recognition. Once they're signed in, users will be prompted to enroll a passkey, and the next time they log into their accounts, they'll be asked to sign in with their passkey. Microsoft is a board member of the FIDO Alliance, that's Fast Identity Online, an open industry association launched over a decade ago that promotes passkeys as a standard passwordless sign-in method used by 15 billion user accounts for authentication. Wow, that's a lot of accounts. It also rolled out support for passkey authentication for personal Microsoft accounts a year ago after adding a built-in passkey manager for Windows Hello with the Windows 11 22H2 feature update. More recently, it started testing WebAuthn API updates to add support for using third-party passkey providers for Windows 11 passwordless authentication. Okay, so let's talk about a couple terms here. So passwordless is pretty much what it sounds like. Instead of logging in with a username and password, there are techniques that allow you to log in without having to create a password that are arguably, technically, more secure. And in particular, they avoid the problems of passwords like phishing, which is somebody tricking you into giving up your passwords, brute force techniques, which is where the bad guys know that we are really bad at choosing good passwords, have long lists of common bad passwords, and just try them all to see if some of them will get them in, or credential stuffing, which is where they figure out that you used password XYZ on one site, and because humans can't remember a lot of passwords and they know that people reuse passwords, will then take those same credentials, probably your email and that password XYZ, and try it on a whole bunch of other sites to see if it gets them in there. That's called credential stuffing. So passwords, if not done properly, have a lot of vulnerabilities, have a lot of problems. Now, if you do them correctly, if you're using a password manager to generate long, strong, unique passwords for all of your sites, and you trust your password manager to only fill in your password on the actual site that it's supposed to be filling it in on, you can avoid a lot of these problems. If done correctly, and that's a big if, passwords are still quite secure. However, in practice, with human beings, they have a lot of problems. And so Microsoft is kind of acknowledging that here and trying to get people to go to these other passwordless technologies like passkeys, which honestly really are in a lot of ways technically superior, but they have their own problems too. Some of which has to do with vendor lock-in. A lot of these systems currently that use passkeys kind of require you to pick a vendor like Apple or Microsoft or Google and use them everywhere. So by trying to make them more convenient and touting all their security benefits, and like in cases like this, making them the default for all new accounts, Microsoft is kind of forcing you into their ecosystem. Now, this article also does say that they're working on, making this available for third-party passkey providers as well. That's great. They absolutely should do that. I get a little worried when they make it the default. I haven't seen the user dialogues in this to know if there's a nice little link at the bottom saying, I don't want to use passwordless. I want to use a password, and make it obvious and easy for you to do it the old-fashioned way if you really want to. I don't like it when they make it the default and then hide or make it really difficult to find the other options. So I'm not sure how this is working here. But passkeys, if we can get them implemented properly, which means that we need a single standard that everybody can conform to, which also allows portability, like I don't have to do everything through Apple. I don't have to do everything through Microsoft. I can use a third party. I can also change my third party later if I change my mind or if that company goes out of business or starts having bad practices that I don't like anymore. For whatever reason, I want to move from, Bitwarden's passkey vault to 1Password's passkey vault. I should be able to securely do that. And the FIDO Alliance is actually working on technical specifications for that right now. So it is coming. And then finally, and I've mentioned this many times before, if there's still some sort of a recovery mechanism that's a lot less secure, then the fact that you're using passkeys really is more of a convenience and it's not really that secure. If at the end of the day you can answer 3 questions like what was your first dog, what city were you born in, and what's your mother's maiden name, and get access to somebody's account, it doesn't matter how secure passkeys are. So we still have to get this worked out. Passkeys has a lot of promise, but we're not quite there yet. Okay, this is actually just a press release from Google. I generally don't like to read press releases, but that's all right. I'll still talk about it. Just keep in mind that this is a lot of marketing speak, and it's obviously very upbeat and positive. But it's an indication that we are moving inexorably towards having our identifying documents, including driver's licenses and passports and things like that, digitized and, for the most part, securely stored in our mobile devices, making our mobile devices that much more a target for compromise, and has other problems as well. But anyway, let me just read this real quick, and then I'll tell you more. Today, we are introducing updates that help you prove your age and identity in a safe and secure way right from your phone. Residents of the United Kingdom will soon be able to create digital ID passes with their UK passports and securely and conveniently store them in Google Wallet. At launch, we're partnering with Rail Delivery Group, which will offer train travelers the opportunity to use their digital ID to verify that they meet the eligibility criteria for select rail cards on its railcard retailing platform, railcard.co.uk. We're also exploring certification within the Digital Identity Trust Framework of the UK's Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, which could allow residents to use their Google Wallet ID passes for alcohol purchases and more. Residents in Arkansas, Montana, Puerto Rico, and West Virginia will soon be able to save their government-issued digital IDs to Google Wallet. And in Arizona, Georgia, Maryland, and New Mexico, users will also be able to use their mobile IDs at the DMV for improved and streamlined customer experiences. God, I hate marketing talk like that. With the Real ID deadline approaching on May 7th, 2025, and we'll see if that doesn't get pushed back again, you can use your ID pass created from a U.S. passport with TSA security for domestic travel at supported airports, even if you do not have a Real ID driver's license or a state-issued ID. ID passes created from UK passports are not currently eligible for use at TSA security. Note that ID Pass is not a replacement for your physical ID, so keep that with you as needed. New use cases are on the way in collaboration with our strong partner ecosystem. Soon, you'll be able to use your digital ID to recover Amazon accounts, access online health services with CVS Health and MyChart by Epic, verify profiles on platforms like Uber, and more. All right, now this is the part that I was actually most interested in. Given many sites and services require age verification, we wanted to develop a system that not only verifies age, but does it in a way that protects your privacy. That's why we are integrating Zero Knowledge Proof, or ZKP, technology into Google Wallet, further ensuring that there is no way to link the age back to your identity. And I will circle back to that claim in a second. This implementation allows us to provide speedy age verification across a wide range of mobile devices, apps, and websites that use our Digital Credential API, which is probably a proprietary Google thing. We will use ZKP, or Zero Knowledge Proofs, where appropriate in other Google products and partner with apps like Bumble, which use digital IDs from Google Wallet to verify user identity, and ZKP to verify age. To help foster a safer, more secure environment for everyone, we will also open source our ZKP technology to other wallets and online services. Okay, so that's good, though just saying you're going to do that doesn't always mean you're going to do it well. Sometimes that still comes with a lot of caveats and baggage. But okay, let's take them at their word for now. Anyway, so back to this claim. It says that it ensures there's no way to link your age back to your identity. Technically, yes, it would allow that. Unfortunately, it's still possible that whatever you're trying to authenticate with, it wants to know your age, actually demands to know more than just your age, or actually demands to know more than you're over 21, for example, because that doesn't require knowing your age. I just need to know that your age is 21 or greater, which is much less information, right? But that doesn't prevent, some bar that you're going to or some website you're going to that wants to know more about you than just whether or not you're over age could request that you give them more information and may not let you in unless you do give them that more information. So there's, technically what could be done in the ideal situation, which Google's talking about here. And then there's the practical side of this where, they may still ask for more and you may still have to be, forced with the decision to provide a lot more information than you want to get access to something or not. So this whole zero knowledge proof thing is great. I've talked about this on and off before, and I did a whole Merlin's Musings topic on this at one point, which is one of my Patreon-only podcasts. And it's a perfect technology for this kind of a thing, where I just need to be able to make a query to answer a question, and I can do it in a way from my device that doesn't divulge any personal information. Like today, if you go into a bar and you want to prove your age, oftentimes you have to hand them a government ID. Like if you hand them their driver's license, there's a lot more information on that license than just your age. In fact, it's your exact birth date, which is very personal information, but it's often your eye color, sometimes your weight, your height, your address, obviously your full name. And today, it may not just be a bouncer, looking at your card and looking at the date for the right date and letting you walk in. Sometimes today, you're actually having your ID scanned. And even if the scanner only shows, green light, red light, like, yes, you're over 21, that scanner still may be saving that information and potentially even sending it off to third parties. And the whole movement toward digital IDs, we may have to do a whole interview on this topic someday because there's a lot of different aspects to this that we need to be careful about. For one thing, it just puts a lot more really sensitive information into our smart devices, which is just one more reason that somebody might want to steal them or compromise them. And perhaps if there's some sort of a flaw in the way that's set up, that might give, let's say, the apps on your phone access to that information when you wouldn't want them to. And there's other aspects as well, like, will law enforcement or intelligence agencies have some sort of privileged access to this information? And would we know if they did? And we already know that there's situations in the UK and the US where the government can make demands of companies to implement things and they're not allowed to talk about them. There's probably metadata associated with those transactions that information might be sold onto third parties, even if the underlying information's not sold. And then we get into, well, most people have smartphones, but not everybody has a smartphone. If we get to the point where this is so commonplace that people who don't have a smartphone are now unable to use these services, that's a problem. And then on top of all this, no matter how we set this up now, it could change in the future in a way that's bad. So anyway, that's a multifaceted issue, digital IDs on phones. And it's probably something I should do an interview on at some point. All right, one more quick article here before we get to the tip of the week. And it's an update to the whole Signalgate debacle. And I knew there were going to be more shoes to drop with this. And there's still going to be more, to be honest. It's going to be the scandal that keeps on giving. But here's the latest twist. And this is from 404 Media. And you probably saw this in the news, but I want to give you some more information about this. Let's start with the basics. Mike Waltz, who was until Thursday U.S. National Security Advisor, has inadvertently revealed he is using an obscure and unofficial version of Signal that is designed to archive messages, raising questions about what classification of information officials are discussing on the app and how that data is being secured. On Thursday, Reuters published a photograph of Waltz checking his mobile phone during a cabinet meeting held by Donald Trump. The screen appears to show messages from various top-level government officials, including J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, and Marco Rubio, who are the Vice President, the Director of National Intelligence, and the Secretary of State, respectively. At the bottom of Waltz's phone screen is a message that looks like Signal's regular PIN verification message. This sometimes appears to encourage users to remember their PIN, which can stop people from taking over their account. But the message is slightly different. It asks Waltz to verify his TMSGNL PIN. This is not the message that is displayed on an official version of Signal. Instead, TMSGNL appears to refer to a piece of software from a company called Telemessage, which makes clones of popular messaging apps, but adds an archiving capability to each of them. A page on Telemessage's website tells users how to install TMSGNL. On that page, it describes how the tool can capture Signal messages on iOS, Android, and desktop. In a video uploaded to YouTube, Telemessage says it works on corporate-owned devices as well as bring your own device or BYOD phones. In the demonstration, 2 phones running the app send messages and attachments back and forth and participate in a group chat. The video claims that the app keeps, quote, intact the Signal security and end-to-end encryption when communicating with other Signal users. The only difference is the Telemessage version captures all incoming and outgoing Signal messages for archiving purposes, unquote. In other words, the robust end-to-end encryption of Signal, as it is typically understood, is not maintained because the messages can be later retrieved after being stored somewhere else. At one point, the video shows copies of those messages in what appears to be an ordinary Gmail account, which would create additional security risks. The video says that the Gmail is for the demo and that Telemessage works with numerous archiving platforms. The fact that Waltz is using the Telemessage version of Signal highlights some of the tension and complexity associated with high-ranking government officials communicating about sensitive topics on an app that can be configured to have disappearing messages. Government officials are required to keep records of their communications, but archiving, if not handled correctly, can potentially introduce security risks to those messages. A Signal spokesperson told 404 Media in email, quote, "We cannot guarantee the privacy or security properties of unofficial versions of Signal," unquote. Neither Telemessage nor representatives of the U.S. government responded to a request for comment. 404 Media found numerous U.S. government contracts that mentioned Telemessage specifically. One for around $90,000 from December of 2024 says, quote, "Telemessage licenses for text message archiving and WhatsApp and Signal licenses," unquote. One concern from those group chats was that government officials may not be following record-keeping laws for government communications by using Signal. Telemessage may solve that problem. In the YouTube video, Telemessage says users of its Signal archiving tool will remain, quote, "compliant with regulations," unquote, and that the tool supports a full company archival compliance. So, okay, let's back up and just summarize here a little bit. So, these top U.S. officials were using a third-party commercial app called Signal. It's free. It's very secure. Security researchers would agree that it's the gold standard for secure communications. However, it is not approved for government use for exchanging classified information. And more to the point, their devices that they are using these things on appear to be their personal devices, which definitely is something you should not be doing. So that's what we knew going into this. But now we are learning that they're not even using Signal. They're using some derivative of Signal called Telemessage SGNL. And the key feature that this derivative of Signal adds and brings to the table is that it automatically archives all of your messages somewhere. It's configurable. And we don't know yet what they have configured that to do. Part of the problem that some people had with this whole scandal was that they were perhaps running afoul of the government records laws, which requires top officials to save all communications for the archivist for, posterity. It's a thing we do in the United States. And so some people were saying, well, that they're breaking that law if they're setting their messages to automatically delete after a certain amount of time, and those things are not being properly recorded for the archive. Okay, so maybe they were trying to fix that by using this version of Signal, which is not, by the way, available to the average person. You have to be part of an enterprise or a group that has what they call MDM capabilities or multi-device management. It's a very restricted app. It's not just something that you and I could just go get, even though at this point many people have found the unlisted apps on the app stores. If you go to the show notes, I will try to include a link to some of the analysis that Micah Lee has done, who I've had on the show, and I've actually been talking with about this as all this stuff was being revealed. Anyway, it's not available to you or I, but somehow, some way, these guys installed this app. And again, we don't really know how that happened. I'm just going to go out on a limb here and guess that this is not a sanctioned White House or U.S. government enterprise setup where some IT person has sanctioned and installed these apps on everybody's phones. We will find out, I'm sure, I hope, what is really going on here. But if that is not the case, then somebody set up some sort of a pseudo company to have an enterprise level account with this group. I don't know. I'm okay. Let me just stop speculating because we don't know yet. But now we know that these messages are being archived, in other words, saved or stored somewhere, but we don't know where. And that just opens up a whole nother vulnerability to this. The real problem, again, was not Signal itself. The Signal protocol, the Signal app is very secure. Nevertheless, the government does not, says explicitly you're not supposed to be using that for classified communications. They have all sorts of methods available to these people for that purpose. And you're definitely not supposed to be doing this on a personal device. If I was a foreign intelligence agent or organization, I would be targeting every one of these people's personal iPhones and Android phones for hacking. And if I can hack into their device, then it doesn't matter how secure Signal is because the messages on the device itself are unencrypted and I would have full access to all that stuff. Well, now these messages are being transmitted somewhere else and stored somewhere else, and either in transmission or in storage, those are just other places where they are potentially vulnerable to the wrong eyes. So late last night on social media, I noticed that Matthew Green had posted the source code for the Android version of this client. And at the time, as this was going around social media, this seemed like, oh my goodness, this was secret stuff that somebody put somewhere. And it turns out, by the way, that somebody had zipped up or compressed the entire source code for the Android client and stored it on Telemessage's WordPress site. If you know how to look at any WordPress site, it was there for anybody to find. I don't know who put it there, and I don't know who found it, but Matthew Green shared it. I downloaded it and started looking through it, and I reached out to Michael Lee immediately to see if he had seen this, and somebody had already given it to him, and he was already looking through it. He and I actually exchanged some messages last night as we kind of poked through the code. And there were some interesting things in there, including some credentials that were baked into the source code, which is a no-no. But this whole thing is just kind of developing over the last 24 hours, and it's still going on. I'm sure I'm going to have more to say about this as we learn more. I will put a link to Micah's blog article on this, which has more information if you're curious. So this scandal is ongoing, and it just keeps getting worse. And I think we're going to learn even more. And my guess is it's probably not going to be good. All right, so I was going to do this article from Consumer Reports. It's a really great article that breaks down the security and privacy of contactless payments, like, mobile payment apps like Venmo, Apple Cash, Cash App, things like that. And they really did a really good job with this. And it was just too long. It was impossible to summarize in any kind of a short form. So what I really want to do, and I've actually wanted to do this for a while, is I want to do a whole show on this. So I have reached out to the author of that article, and we'll see if I can't get her on the show. And we'll just dedicate a whole show to this because this is really interesting. A lot of people are using these apps now, and it's really important that we understand how they work and what the vulnerabilities are. So anyway, if you're curious now and don't want to wait for whenever that day may come, or if it comes, I guess, check out the article in the show notes to Consumer Reports. So now let's get to my tip of the week. And the tongue-in-cheek title for this is Disable Your MAID. The actual name of the article is Disable Your Mobile Ad ID, which is MAID is short for Mobile Ad ID. And we talked about this extensively last week with Zach Edwards. If you missed that, you should definitely go back and listen to it because it was a really educational discussion about real-time bidding and how all of our data and these dossiers being created about us often key off of these mobile advertising IDs. And I put links in the show notes last week about how to disable these mobile ad IDs on your Android and iOS devices, but I didn't really talk about it in the show, and I thought, you know what, that would make a good tip of the week. So I, of course, have a full article about this on firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com. You can get the full details there with lots of nice links to even more information. And in fact, I'm not going to go through everything here. I'm going to refer you to that anyway for the details. But I want to explain what this is and explain at a high level why you want to turn these off. And also, of course, if you're a newsletter subscriber, then this is waiting for you right now in your inbox. It would have come out last night. So obviously, we use our smartphones for everything these days, and much of what we do on our smartphone involves communicating with the internet. The apps that we use, the browsing we do on our phones, the videos we watch on our phones, all of this is communicating with the internet. And because of the way things are today, all of those apps and all of those websites want to track us, remember us, correlate our activity across these apps and across these websites so that they can build, detailed dossiers on us, sell them to third parties and marketers, and eventually try to get us to buy stuff. So very early on, a lot of these companies, these marketing companies and, ad companies like Facebook and Google figured out that our phones have unique IDs associated with them, globally unique IDs associated with them that they could use to track us. Even if they don't have our name, even if they don't have our mobile number, they can access these IDs. In the old days, this might be your IMEI or UDID. And then as this started getting abused, Apple and Google said, okay, wait a minute. We're not going to give you access to those things anymore. Apps can't get to that information because it's too personal. It's too easy to track. So we're going to come up with a manufactured a mobile ad ID or a MAID. And initially what they would do to kind of help break some of the tracking that went along with that is Apple and Google gave you methods by which you could rotate your ID, change it to something new. And you had to go manually do this. You couldn't set it to automatically do it. It's really kind of dumb, to be honest. And it didn't really help matters much. So then eventually Apple in iOS 14.5 comes out with app tracking transparency. And this was the thing that really upset the apple cart, so to speak, I guess, pun not intended. And that was when Apple actually gave you the choice to say, do you want this app to be able to track you? And if you said no, it did not give them your ad tracking ID, or I guess technically under the covers, it gave you the ID of 0, which means nothing. And this really changed things. And the key part about this was that Apple was in full control of this dialogue. It was in control of what text you were seeing and what the buttons said. Because if Facebook was allowed to write their own, their dialogue would have been, hey, do you want an improved experience that's personalized just for you? It would use dark patterns to try to get you to say yes. Apple just says, hey, do you want this app to track you or not? Yes or no? And it turns out that when given a clear and unambiguous choice like that, a lot of people said no. I forget what the percentage was, but it was quite high. And Facebook was really ticked off about this. And they said in 2022, the year after this came into being, that it cost them $13 billion because people didn't want to be tracked and turned it off. And Facebook lost access to all that information. Now, Google shortly after that came up with what it called its Android Privacy Sandbox. And it's a little bit different. There is still a way, and I don't have an Android phone, so I have to believe what I'm reading about this from the EFF, which I certainly trust over Google, that there are ways to disable the ad ID with Google and on Android as well, and it does the same thing. It sets your ad ID effectively for those apps to 0. But these mobile ad IDs are used everywhere, and it turns out what we learned from Zach Edwards last week is that even on third-party stuff that is not mobile-related, a lot of times they can still correlate you to some mobile phone somewhere, and that MAID, that mobile ad ID, is what they key your record off of. So you really want to not have that available if you can help it. And so the EFF has a great website called Surveillance Self-Defense. It's easy to remember too. It's ssd.eff.org. And in there, they've got lots of great guides on privacy and turning off surveillance features like these, including how to disable your Android ad ID and your iOS ad ID. So I'm not going to regurgitate that here. I've got links in the show notes. You should definitely check them out there. I actually had links to those in last week's show notes as well. Now, one more thing I want to make sure I call out here is just because you turn this off does not mean that these apps will not be able to track you. Because we were given the choice to do this, a lot of companies have tried to come up with other clever ways to track you, like trying to fingerprint your mobile device and other ways that they can kind of uniquely identify you. And of course, it's a cat and mouse game. Apple has tried to defeat those mechanisms that would allow these apps to try to fingerprint you. It's just goes back and forth. Because we have no privacy laws that say that this cannot be done, they're going to try to do it every way they can think of doing it. But there are some things that we can do, and therefore we should do to mitigate this as much as possible. And one of those is to disable your mobile ad ID. All right, that is your news and your tip of the week. All right, that's going to do it for this week, folks. Thank you again for tuning in. I've got so many interviews already recorded and just kind of backed up. So I'm actually going to try to take a bit of a break from interviewing over the summer because, I've literally got interviews that will take me out into August. already recorded and ready to go. I've got one more interview I'm going to be recording later this week with Josh Corman about a very important topic. That one's going to kind of get to jump to the head of the line, assuming I can make that happen, for reasons I will discuss when that interview comes out. But after that, I'm going to take a little break on doing some interviews. I say that, and then something's going to come up, like this person from Consumer Reports is going to get back to me, and I'm going to interview her. And anyway, that is my problem to solve. And for you, that just means I've got a bunch of great content already waiting in the wings for you to listen to. So, again, as I always say, if you have not subscribed, be sure to do that, and then you won't miss any of that. I ran across an interesting product on the web called Prepper Drive. And it led me to an open source project that was kind of similar called Internet in a Box. And the premise is really kind of cool. You set up this Raspberry Pi based Wi-Fi hub that has a built-in large hard drive, or a SD card, I guess, that contains like most of Wikipedia and a whole bunch of really helpful internet-based information, but it's a copy of it all. For example, one of the use cases was in developing countries where they don't necessarily have good internet access. You could take this device into a classroom and everybody could connect to this device and basically access Wikipedia without having access to the internet. And for me, it was the kind of the digital prepper aspect that I thought was interesting. It's having an offline copy of some really important and useful information, and again, building onto a really cool Raspberry Pi based project. I thought that was cool. So anyway, I did it. I put one together, and my Merlin's Musings this week is going to tell you about my experiences there. But if you're curious and you're not a patron, you could just search on Internet in a Box, and you'll find this project. All right, that's it for this week. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there, and until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.